Her voice slipped into the quiet space between us like a match struck in a dark room. "What's on your mind?" she asked. No tease, no hesitation, just steady and soft. I froze. My eyes had lingered too long, caught on her without permission, and now the question hung in the air, the kind of question that doesn't let you escape with a shrug. I felt heat climb up my neck. Half of me wanted to laugh it off, find some excuse about zoning out in the middle of a rough day. The other half, well, that part wanted to admit exactly why I couldn't stop staring. It wasn't casual. It wasn't harmless. Her gaze carried weight, and my silence only made it heavier. I tried to look away, but even that seemed like an answer. Suddenly, the next few seconds held far more danger than they should have. It hadn't started as anything remarkable. I was sitting in one of those coffee shops you choose not for the quality of the roast, but for the quiet corner table and decent Wi-Fi. My thoughts were scattered, a half-finished to-do list drowning under the fog of fatigue. I'd been staring at my screen for so long that the words blurred into meaningless shapes. Then the door opened. Not dramatically, not like in a movie where everything slows down, just the sound of a hinge and a little rush of air as someone new stepped inside. At first I barely noticed, until my gaze wandered up without thought and landed on her. There was something about her entrance that sharpened the entire room. She moved with a kind of ease, as if she'd walked into that space 100 times before. A dark coat draped over her shoulders, hair pushed back with the careless precision of someone who knew exactly how much attention they attracted. I told myself to focus on my screen. You know how it is. You catch yourself noticing someone too closely and your instinct is to retreat, to pretend the moment never happened. I sipped my coffee, eyes back on the glow of the laptop, but the spell had already taken shape. My gaze betrayed me. Every few seconds, some invisible pull yanked it back toward her. I watched as she ordered, her mouth curling briefly in a half-smile at something the barista said. She leaned one way, brushed her hand absently through her hair, then tapped her, was still watching me. A flicker at the edge of her mouth that wasn't quite a smirk, but also wasn't polite indifference. She knew. She absolutely knew. I tried the usual escape tactics. Check my phone, shuffle a paper, pretend to read. None of them worked. Like gravity itself, she kept pulling my eyes back. Each time they met hers, the air thickened with an unspoken invitation. That was the first moment I noticed her shift. Just the slightest lean, directing her steps toward an empty table not far from mine, close enough that the space between us felt intentional. And in that decision, casual as it was, the setting changed. A crowded cafe suddenly felt like a stage narrowed down to just two people, playing a game neither of them had named out loud. It wasn't just about attraction, it was about collision. Two distracted lives crossing, with too much awareness to brush away as mere accident. She didn't sit at that table right away. Instead, she lingered in the open space, adjusting her drink lid, shaking a sugar packet she didn't even pour in. Every second stretched longer, baiting me into another stolen glance. Then, with the kind of calm confidence most people only fake, she walked directly into the orbit I had been trying to avoid. She pulled out a chair at the table next to mine, close enough to hear every nervous shift in my breath. Her presence filled that corner instantly. Every bit of noise in the cafe seemed to dull. I could hear the soft slide of her coat as she draped it over the chair, the faint scrape of her cup against the table. My hands hovered over my keyboard, but whatever I'd been typing had turned irrelevant. I caught the upward tilt of her lips, that half-smile again, except now it was closer, sharper. She leaned slightly forward, elbows resting on the table, studying me openly. "You always look at strangers like that, or am I lucky?" she asked. Her tone wasn't cruel, it was teasing, but surgical in how it cut through my defenses. I fumbled. "Sorry, I didn't realize." My voice trailed, too thin, too obvious. Her eyebrows lifted as if to say she knew better. Her silence pressed harder than any words could. She had no rush, no need. Wasn't sure what pieces I had left. That's when she leaned in, narrowing the space you couldn't measure on a ruler but could feel in your chest. Her voice dropped, low enough it belonged only to me. What's on your mind? The question sank deep. It wasn't playful anymore. It was curved with genuine curiosity, edged with challenge. And I could feel the weight of choice behind it. Do I brush this off with some half-truth about work stress or sleepless nights? Or do I crack the thin shell and let her see what's been pressing through all along? In those seconds, time feels greedy. Every tick pulling me toward a mouth I shouldn't admit I crave, toward a confession that could tangle consequences beyond this table. Her eyes stayed steady. She wasn't giving me an escape route. I shifted in my seat, fingers drumming lightly against the laptop edge. My mind was a blur of rehearsed excuses and swallowed truths. Careful, she said with a quiet laugh, reading me before I spoke. Say nothing, and I'll assume everything. That made the air pulse hotter. My heart kicked because she wasn't bluffing. Silence really might expose me more than words. I caught myself studying the details of her face instead. The way her lashes lowered for a second, then lifted like she knew the effect. The faint curl of hair brushing her cheek. The rhythm of her breath, calm where mine stumbled. It wasn't just attraction. It was pressure, pure and unrelenting. She was pulling me into a current I wasn't sure I had the strength or the will to fight. The choice hovered, alive between us. Deflect, confess, or drown in silence. And as I sat there, caught between restraint and honesty, I realized she wasn't going to let me walk away without giving her something. Maybe not everything, but something. Honesty has a way of sneaking out when silence presses too hard. Mine slipped through before I could build another excuse. It's you, I muttered, low enough it could almost be mistaken for a sigh. I didn't mean to stare, but you've got this way of pulling me out of my...
Good. She laughed, a quiet, surprised sound, like she hadn't expected me to admit it so plainly. That's not what most men say when a stranger catches their attention. Maybe they're better at pretending. The words slipped out too fast, sharper than intended, but I didn't take them back. Her gaze lingered, and she set her drink aside, as though the exchange itself had grown more intoxicating than the caffeine. I could see she was turning over my words, deciding whether I was bold or reckless. Maybe both. Interesting, she said finally. So a look is enough to undo you. I shook my head, though my voice betrayed me. Not just a look, the way you looked back. For a moment, a flicker of silence settled between us. Not the heavy pause of intimidation, but something more fragile, like a thread stretched tight, daring either of us to break it. She leaned a little closer, voice lower than the din of the cafe. You're not afraid to admit that? I swallowed. I'm afraid of plenty, but not telling the truth, at least in this moment, feels worse. Her mouth curved, half amusement, half approval. You don't strike me as someone who spills everything to strangers. I don't, I said, and I meant it. My fingers tapped against the laptop as though to prove restraint. But sometimes you meet someone and the usual rules don't stick. There it was. Vulnerability. Raw and bare. I could feel the weight of it pressing against the safety of normal conversation. If she laughed now, if she dismissed it, I'd feel foolish. But instead, she tilted her head, eyes softening in a way I hadn't seen before. You really think this is more than small talk? She asked. Yes, I said, simple and sure. The certainty in my voice startled even me. She studied me for a beat, breaking her stillness only to trace her fingertip along her cup. That subtle movement carried more power than any words she could have spoken. Then she leaned back, letting the silence stretch just long enough to remind me she was still in control. But when her voice returned, it was quieter, almost contemplative. "Most people would have dodged," she admitted. "You didn't." Should have.
That answer told me everything and nothing at once. The lines between confidence and exposure blurred fast. What started as glances and teasing words had evolved into something heavier, a pressure neither of us tried to release. She shifted in her seat, not dramatically, but enough to invade the tiny border I had left as safe ground. The chair legs creaked softly as she tilted closer. The sleeve of her coat brushed against my elbow, and the touch, even that light, felt like a current disguised beneath fabric. "So tell me," she said, her tone dipped, smooth and deliberate. "What is it you think you're seeing in me?" Her phrasing left no room for casual answers. My throat tightened, and I stared at the torn edge of a napkin under my hand as if the fibers could supply a script. The truth was, I didn't know, or maybe I didn't dare sum it in a neat line. I tried anyway. Something magnetic. My voice a whisper, and I regretted it instantly for how raw it sounded. She tilted her head, eyes catching mine with no mercy. Magnetic. She let the word linger, rolling it slowly, then a faint smile. "Careful. Magnets pull. Sometimes too close." The cafe buzzed on around us, but the sound frayed into background noise. The conversation had folded into its own room, private despite the crowd. "Maybe I don't mind," I whispered back. Her eyebrows rose, amused. "That sounds like surrender." Then she leaned forward further, and her perfume, warm, faint citrus, filled the narrow pocket of space between us. Silence followed, yet her proximity said more than a dozen lines of dialogue. The restraint inside me strained. I felt it in the tightness of my chest, in the twitch of my hand hovering close to hers but refusing to land. Then she spoke again, a direct pivot that sliced into my hesitation. "Why hold back if you already feel it?" That sentence pressed harder than any touch could. My mind scrambled, and I fought the urge to confess recklessly. "Because I don't know what happens next," I admitted, voice steadier than I felt. Her gaze softened, though her smile stayed sharp. "Maybe that's the point. You don't control every next." Not touching mine, but close enough to spark the question. My knuckles tingled from the near contact. "You're not used to someone calling you out, are you?" she whispered. I shook my head, struggling with words. "Not like this." Her smile curved slow. "Good. Then let yourself feel it." Those words pressed me toward a line I wasn't ready to cross. Yet each second in her orbit dared me closer. The space around us tightened until even breaths became choices. She didn't move again. She just waited, eyes steady, lips parted slightly as if daring me to close the distance. Every sound in my head quieted to a single beat, the possibility that if I leaned 1 inch more, nothing between us would remain innocent. Her chair inched closer, wood scraping against the cafe floor, and suddenly the gap between us felt almost reckless. She leaned forward, chin balanced on her hand, eyes holding onto mine with a steady force that made every excuse I'd prepared collapse. "Why look?" she asked, the words slow, deliberate, "if you're not going to say something real." That was the break, the challenge I'd been avoiding since the moment she caught me staring. My pulse kicked, and I could feel the tension pressing like a weight in my ribcage. A dozen versions of me scrambled, one trying to retreat into politeness, another aching to burst the restraint wide open. I tried once more to hide behind silence, but she didn't let me off. Her gaze sharpened just enough to slice through the protective layer of casualness I'd been holding. I started, then stopped, every word feeling too fragile. Finally, I lifted my head, let her see the truth raw instead of polished. Because I'm afraid. Her brows shifted, not in mockery, but surprise. Afraid of what? Of saying the wrong thing. Of admitting how much you've pulled me in. Afraid of where that leads, and what it says about me. The honesty burned as it left me, but also cooled something inside. For the first time that evening, I let my shoulders loosen. Her lips parted, and I expected a laugh or a dismissive shrug, but instead her voice softened. You think you're the only one cautious? The turn in her tone. Danger didn't feel like exposure. It felt like recognition. I let a fragile smile surface. So what happens now? She laughed quietly, shaking her head. Now we sit with the truth, and maybe leave the rest unanswered. Unresolved, yes, but alive with implication. The current between us wasn't quenched, just tucked inside the hush of what might be. That final glance lasted longer than any line spoken. Not a promise, not even an invitation, but a charge hanging in the air, daring both of us to decide if we'd ever step past it. I gathered my things a little slower than usual, pretending the zipper of my bag needed attention, while she sipped the last of her drink with calm precision. Neither of us broke the eye contact until I finally turned, leaving our corner charged with a silence that refused to fade. Outside, the street sounded louder, harsher. The buzz of traffic, the bite of winter air. Yet underneath it all was the echo of her voice. Why look if you're not going to say something real? The truth was, I did say something real. More real than I'd intended. What it meant for tomorrow or forever I couldn't define. But in that small cafe, honesty had carved a space raw enough to change how I carried myself. Moments like that remind you. Connection isn't always planned. Sometimes it leaps out of nowhere, refusing to wait for the right time or place. So what would you have done? Confess? Deflect? Or stay silent? Tell me below. And if you want more stories that explore those unguarded flashes where everything shifts, make sure to subscribe and stick around. These moments may be fleeting, but the questions they leave linger far longer.